The confrontation between Rome and Carthage was one of the key processes of antiquity, which influenced the entire further history of Western civilization. The events of more than 2,000 years ago occupy scholars and specialists to this day, and individual events of the Punic Wars have become the source of subjects for hundreds of works of art and continue to inspire masters today. The military art of that epoch is the subject of a separate study. Strategic methods and tactical principles used by the ancients are magnificent examples of the art of conducting both individual battles and entire campaigns. Of particular interest is the Second Punic War, in its scope and scale quite comparable to the wars of the new and even modern times. The battles were fought in several strategic directions at once, in Italy, Spain, Africa, Sicily, and at sea, and if you add to the above and the Balkan theater, where Philip V Macedonian fought with the allies of Rome, the war can be considered all Mediterranean. And if Hannibal's war, the Italian front of the Second Punic War, is well known to everyone, the campaigns in Spain, as a rule, remain in the shadow of events in the Apennines. The Pyrenees were a crucial region, the possession of which was critical for both Carthage and Rome. The fact is that after the First War with the Romans, Punic, expelled from Sicily, and afterwards also from Corsica and Sardinia, and almost ruined their own state in a war with mercenaries, were forced to look for sources of economic recovery and resource base to continue the fight against the Italics. The conquest of Spain by Hamilcar Barca allowed not only to pay the retribution and return the former power, but also to create a powerful bridgehead on the continent, from where the successors were able to strike new blows to the Republic. Hannibal's victories of the first years of the war would have been impossible without such a solid base on the Pyrenees, where he was actually an independent ruler. Of course, Rome realized that the power of Carthage is largely based on the possession of the wealth of Spain, its raw material base and impressive land fund. In addition, the local tribes were excellent warriors and made up a significant part of the army of Punic generals. Soon after the outbreak of war in Rome ripened the idea of sending an expedition to the west, in order to interrupt the message Hannibal with his brothers and undermine the power of the Nemesis. Several years of bloody battles and campaigns did not give the Romans a decisive advantage. Victories were replaced by defeats, and the death of the brother Scipio, commanding the expeditionary corps in Spain, almost ruined the whole affair. A radical turning point in the Iberian Peninsula, and with it the whole war, occurred after the appointment of Publius Cornelius Scipio in Spain, the son and nephew of the dead Roman commanders. At the time of his appointment, Scipio was only 25 years old, an extremely young age for a proconsul, but the young aristocrat managed to convince the popular assembly of the advisability of his appointment. The citizens of the Republic were not mistaken in their choice. Publius Cornelius turned out to be much more talented than his relatives, and with all the energy to take up the cause, he was captured New Carthage, the key to southern Spain, after which immediately in several points Scipio managed to squeeze Gasdrubal Abarca, brother Hannibal and Punic commander in Spain. At Becula Gasdrubal suffered defeat, but he managed to avoid complete defeat, after which he went to Italy to help his brother. As is known, Gasdrubal Barca found his death on the battlefield at Matavra, and Scipio continued to conquer Spain. Local tribes, seeing the success of the Romans, gradually moved to the side of Publius Cornelius, but Punions and did not think to surrender. The growth of Roman popularity in the region was promoted by the commander himself, who showed himself not only as a military leader, but also as an administrator. The ancients have brought us several vivid facts about Scipio's initial stay in Spain. The most famous story, Magnanimity Scipio, is associated with the story of how Publius Cornelius, after the capture of New Carthage soldiers as a trophy, brought a girl distinguished by beauty and article, which, however, was betrothed to a young man Lucius from a noble Spanish family. Scipio, wishing to acquire an ally, sent the girl to her betrothed, and the ransom that her parents brought for her gave the dowry for the bride. According to legend, the Spanish chief Lucius, with a force of 1,500 warriors, swore allegiance to Scipio and the Roman people. Even if this account by Titus Livy is legendary, it still demonstrates how descendants perceived the figure of Publius Cornelius. Scipio's temperance and magnanimity served as the basis for dozens of paintings by great artists. Even the enemies of the Roman with admiration said that Scipio more acquired by his own actions than by force of arms. However, the war was not over. For the campaign Punici collected about 75,000 soldiers, many of whom were veterans of campaigns of previous years. Another part was made up of African contingents from the metropolis. In addition, in the army of Punions was a whole corps of elephants, tanks of antiquity, capable of causing a lot of damage unprepared to meet them to the enemy. Scipio had only 4 legions. The rest of the troops had to recruit from the Iberians, who were brave but unreliable warriors. Once the father and uncle of the commander too trusted the locals and died a brave death. So Publius Cornelius was well aware of what is worth Spanish loyalty. However, there was nothing to do, the army needed replenishment, and waiting for troops from Rome was pointless. Scipio was not one of those who share with the enemy initiative, and therefore it was necessary at all costs to impose their will on the enemy. Under the command of the great Roman were about 40,000 soldiers, a large part of which were not distinguished by training and discipline, but missed the chance to decide the outcome of the struggle for Spain was impossible. As further events showed, the young commander brilliantly calculated both the course of the campaign and its results. On the result of the battle depended a lot. Odersdrubal with Magan top over the proconsul of Spain, all the achievements of Publius Cornelius in recent years would have been overturned. Moreover, after the defeat of Scipio would urgently need reinforcements, otherwise all the lands under the control of Rome could be repulsed by the Carthaginians. A decisive victory for Scipio, in turn, would have tipped the scales definitively on the side of Rome, which would have created a danger for Africa itself and Carthage. The plan of the parties was to force the enemy first to move to active action. The price of failure was too high to give the enemy the advantage of defense, so coming into contact with the enemy generals camped against each other and waited for a good moment to start the battle. Day after day Gasdrubal and Scipio led troops in front of the camp, offering a battle on their own terms. During this time, the opponents got used to each other. It seemed that the big battle in the vicinity of Ilipa and will not happen, and everything will be limited to only separate skirmishes between the Numidians and horsemen in the service of the Romans, but the future winner Hannibal was not so simple. Looking at the order of the Carthaginians, Scipio noticed that Gasdrubal always builds troops in a single line, with more experienced and better equipped contingents that came from Africa. He put in the center against the legionaries of the Romans, and less resistant Spaniards and Balearics on the flanks of the infantry formation, covered by elephants and cavalry. Having accustomed the enemy to the idea that the Roman army in the upcoming battle will be built mirror image, that is, determining the place of heavy shock infantry in the center and placing the Spaniards on the wings, Publius Cornelius on the day of battle changed the usual arrangement. The battle began with a battle between the cavalry and the gunners, and the proconsul deliberately raised his soldiers earlier than usual so that they had time to equip and eat without haste, and then began to carry out his plan. While the light forces fought, both sides formed a battle order. Hasdrubal built troops as usual, and Scipio resorted to trickery and placed the legions on the flanks, and the Spaniards placed in the center and even a little behind the wings, forming a kind of semicircle or arc. The battle has begun. While the order of infantry converged, the task of light troops of the Romans was not so much to win the flanks, but to fight with the elephants, and they successfully succeeded. Elephants, frightened by the disorderly battle of horsemen, the lights and light infantry, rushed from the flanks in the middle of the line. Punici, writes Titus Livius, when the main forces converged at a distance of 500 steps, Scipio ordered the center to slow down the pace of movement, and the flanks do not hesitate to rush to the enemy. This decision is similar to that taken 10 years earlier at Hannibal. The Romans have learned a lot during this time. Separately, we should note the good controllability of detachments under the command of Scipio. Without it, such maneuvers would be impossible. Having so carefully prepared the victory, the commander only had to finish what he started. The weak flanks of Gasdrubal were broken by cohorts of Romans, and the center Gasdrubal actually never entered the battle. Tired, hungry, and disorganized by the attack of their own elephants, the troops of the Carthaginians were demoralized, so that the battle threatened to end in a real beating of the enemies of Rome. Fortunately for Gasdrubal, he still managed to withdraw part of the troops from the battle and lock himself in the camp. Judging by the reports of ancient authors, he was helped in this by the sudden bad weather, preventing Scipio to complete the defeat of the complete destruction of the enemy army on the battlefield. However, here said the strategic genius of the commander, who initially laid the vector of attack so that in case of success to intercept the enemy messages with Gades, the main base that remained in the hands of the Carthaginians. Despite the miraculous rescue, Gasdrubal had to hastily leave the camp and go to the Atlantic coast. But even here the Roman was at the height, consolidating the success achieved on the battlefield, strategic pursuit. The cavalry and skirmishers overtook what was left of Hasdrubal's army and massacred it. Only a small detachment of Punians managed to gain a foothold on a well-placed height, but their leaders had already abandoned them. Stealthily at night, Hasdrubal fled the army, followed by Magan. The commanders fled from the continent whose fate was sealed. The war in Spain was lost, so now all forces must be thrown into the defense of Africa. So with one operation, Publius Cornelius Scipio not only eliminated the threat to his influence, but also finally conquered Spain for Rome. The conquest of Spain, on the one hand, eliminated any conceivable threat to Italy, on the other created an excellent springboard for the continuation of the war in the lands of the Numidians and the Carthaginian territories. It remained to find allies to fight the Punishers in their own lands and defeat them in the heart of their power, with what Scipio brilliantly coped in subsequent campaigns. In the art of war, the campaign in Spain is instructive not only as a repetition of Hannibal's plan at Cannes, but also as a remarkable example of the use of military cunning, based on the imposition of the enemy patterns and their subsequent destruction. In addition, Scipio, despite alarming news about the size of the enemy forces, resisted the temptation to flood his army with Spaniards. Also draws attention to the extraordinary elaboration of the operation, from the overall plan to individual tactical techniques. All this gives Scipione a brilliant military commander, well understood the basics of military science and psychology as a simple soldier, left without breakfast, and the enemy commanders left without an army.